Hi, this is Terry Woolsey. I'm here with my wife Janet, and I want to talk today about the physical evidences of the Book of Mormon lands as depicted in the Book of Mormon. In order to do that, we're going to talk about a number of things, but first of all, I want to mention that life is one eternal round, and it's like karma. What goes around comes around. And it seems like the scriptures point this out to us. So if we look in Doctrine and Covenants in the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, Book of Revelations, section 93, verse 33, it says, "For man is spirit. The elements are eternal, and the spirit and the element inseparably connected." That's an important point, because if they're inseparably connected, if they're disconnected at death, it means they will get reconnected. And it also means that what started will come back to its beginning again. Receive a fullness of joy. And when separated, man cannot receive a fullness of joy. So in verse 34, it's telling us that if we're unable to do that, we couldn't receive a fullness of joy. And then verse 35 tells us why. It says, because the elements, the physical, are the tabernacle of God. And so we are the tabernacle of God. That puts a huge onus on us to understand why we're here, where we're going, and what we're supposed to be doing. We decided that we would go out to look for evidence of the land of Book of Mormon because of a number of things, but primarily was I think in the back of my mind was the Bible has locations that we know of. And quite often you'll hear people say, well, we don't know where the Book of Mormon lands really are. And I'm going, well, why don't we? Of course we should know where they are. And so I decided I would do my own research. So we went on a trip out to Ohio. We landed first in Columbus, Ohio. Shows right here on this picture, Columbus. Koshkotan was the second place we went to, and there's a number of other places we went to. And I went looking for places mentioned in the Book of Mormon, and so that's what we're going to do today. So we've already talked about that. In the beginning of the Book of Mormon, it talks about, I beheld other books which came forth by the power of the Lamb from the Gentiles. So it didn't come forward from the church, it came from the Gentiles, unto them, which is referring to the seed of the people of the Book of Mormon, and unto the convincing of the Gentiles themselves, the remnant of the seed of the people that were here in the Book of Mormon, and the Jews that were scattered upon all the face of the earth, that the records, plural, of the prophets, plural, and of the 12 apostles, plural, of the Lamb are true. And the angel spake unto me, saying, these last records, so there's not going to be more records come forward, or the last records that were given to us, which thou hast seen among the Gentiles, so you've seen them among the Gentiles, shall establish the truth of the first. So the records that are coming forth that he saw in a vision were among the Gentiles. And so we look for those records. So the first part, the Jews, could be the lost 10 tribes. The remnant of the seed of my brethren, and also the Jews, is the combining of the races, and then the Gentiles themselves as being another group of people. Other records, Doctrine and Covenants, section 9 records, I will give you records of John, records of the Pearl of Great Price, the Dead Sea Scrolls, the Rosetta Stone, the Sumerian tablets, the Book of Enoch, the Book of Thomas, the Book of Mary, the Book of the Dead. In 2000 BC, that was King Kakai. In 2400 BC, also wrote, an Egyptian king wrote a record that we have. the Dresden Codex in Mesoamerica, 300 AD, the Florentine Codex in Mesoamerica also, the wax tablets of Pompeii in 79 AD, the Gnostic writings of Ethiopia, the Michigan tablets, the Hindu writings, the Verda, the Quran. And there are 10 major records that people have, and the Spirit asks us to discern the truth out of them. For example, the Apocrypha is another record that we have that used to be part of the Bible when Joseph Smith was around, but was removed, and he asked if he should translate it. He says, no, let people read it, and the Spirit will tell them what's true. And that's the way we do it. So all of these are books, all of them have value, and they've all come to us here as our technology and information has increased. We've been able to get more and more information and put the links together as to how these truths are connected and how these people with their records are connected. And they shall commence digging up heaps of earth round about all the cities. So this is in the Book of Mormon, throughout all the land, not just in a specific part, but throughout all the land, which was possessed by the Nephites. So all the land possessed by the Nephites. And upon the top of these ridges of earth, he caused that there should be timbers, yea, works of timber built up to the height of a man round about the city. And he caused that upon those works of timber there should be a frame of pickets built upon the timbers round about, and they were strong and high. And he caused timbers to be erected that overlooked those works of pickets, and caused places of security to be built upon those towers, that the stones and arrows of the Lamanites could not hurt them. And so we recognize, are there artifacts? So this comes out of the Book of Mormon, talks first about heaps of land, and we say, well, if there's heaps of land, and that was supposed to be around 600 BC to 421 AD, the Book of Mormon, we should be able to find some of those cities or remnants of those cities if they heap dirt up, because the land won't make heaps of dirt like that by itself. It has to be done manually by a person or people. And so we went looking for that kind of stuff, and in here it talks about the ridges also. On top of the ridges of earth, he caused there should be timbers. I wouldn't expect that we'd find those timbers, because if it's 2,000 years old, they'd be rotted away and we wouldn't have them anymore. But we should be able to find earthworks of some kind that go about it. In Alma 16, it says, nevertheless, after many days, their dead bodies were heaped up upon the face of the earth, and they were covered with a shallow covering. So this is another thing that we can look for. Heaped up bones on the earth, covered with a shallow covering. And it will give us an indication, a strong compelling evidence that these fit the criteria. And there were great, in Ether it says, and this goes back 2,000 years, there were great calamities in all the land, for they had testified that a great curse shall come upon the land and also upon the people, that there should be a great destruction upon them, such as one had never seen on the face of the land. Their bones should become as heaps on the earth upon the face of the land, except they should repent of the wickedness. And then in Moroni 2, at a later date, it goes ahead and says the same thing. And I saw that the day of grace was past. I saw thousands of them hewn down, open rebellion, and heaped up as dung upon the face of the land. And thus 340 years passed away. How do we identify the lands? What description in the writings? They tell us what it should look like. We also have traditional stories. We have genealogy, and there are bodies of water described in the Book of Mormon. There's animals described in the Book of Mormon. There's weapons described. There's all kinds of descriptions. So we're going to go look for those things as artifacts, and that's why we went out to this area. So let's get on with it. In 1890, the Smithsonian put out all these red dots on this map, ignoring all the other names, and we'll get back to them. But ignoring that, these dots represent over 100,000 mounds and berms that were like mentioned in the Book of Mormon here in the United States and Canada. And they cover all of the land. And in fact, we'll explore that further. Here are the new ones that have been found since 1890 with the little pinpoints, and they go from sea to sea and up into Canada also. This one here, if we're looking for locations, a good place to start in the Book of Mormon is the story of Joseph Smith, where he said he received a visit from an angel named Moroni, and he instructed him to go to this hill that was near his home. And he called this hill Cumorah. And so today we call this hill Cumorah. And so there is a physical location that we can identify in the Book of Mormon right away, which is the hill Cumorah. It's there, it's physical. Joseph Smith said he got the records from an angel from there and translated them by the power of God. The interesting thing about this particular one, it says that they heaped up earths of dirt. And if you look at this hill, it doesn't appear to be natural. If you look at the right-hand side where the buildings are up in the top part of the picture, where you see the body of water, you'll see that there is a berm, a cut in the earth that comes down, and it would have been pulled up and put up and made this mound. Now, it might have been a fairly natural one to begin with, or not, but there's a huge amount of dirt that appears to have been removed and created a burrow there. So if somebody was attacking you on this hill and they were coming from that direction, they would have to come up on that. You can also see that on the other side, there's indications that it might have been a small berm where the road is. So that's one location that we can take a look at and identify that would say, and this identify this hill. And in the Book of Mormon, this goes all the way back to 2000 BC, where this hill was identified first by the Jaredites in the Book of Ether, all the way up to the end of our time, or the end of their time, which was 1421. And there are some controversies about this, and we'll discuss those also. When Joseph Smith made his fantastic claims and published the Book of Mormon as an ancient history of American Indians, some scoffed at the idea that a major battle had anciently taken place in the local vicinity. However, evidence was produced that documented that this region of the country did indeed once possess heavy Indian population, and that a terrible battle had taken place in that location. It was documented by E.J. Squire, who did a lot of the work on those maps in 1890. And this was done in 1851, that they had identified this already. So Squire says, human bones of men, women, and children, both sexes, were thrown together promiscuously by the thousands, he's saying. He noted large quantities of pottery, pipes, flints, arrowheads, stone hatchets, and other implements were also found there. He further stated that the ancient relics unearthed in the vicinity, which he estimated to be several hundreds years old, showed considerable evidence of Hebrew origin. This is very interesting. This is put out by Antiquities of New York in 1851. So this substantiates that, in fact, battles did take place there. This is another hill. It's called Miami. And it's one of the largest hills. And that was a picture that was taken back in the early 1900s. And that's what the hill looked like. And today it looks different. We'll show you some pictures of that. That's a typical mound that we're talking about. And Cumorah would be a typical burrow, mound, or hill. In these hills, this particular one that they're talking about here, they found the copper bracelet, ringlets, slate gorge, pipes, spear points, bones, shells, and beads were all found in this, as well as this little character here, which is called the Birdman. And they were made out of, some of them were made out of gold. He was. And he's actually the mascot kind of thing of Ohio. Here is another one that is in church history. It's called Zelf's Mound, and some people call it Mormon Mound, but it's called Zelf's Mound. And Joseph Smith took 1,000 to 1,200 men on a march called Zion's March from Kirkland, Ohio, out to Des Moines Rapids on the Mississippi River. And this is just north of Nauvoo, or Quincy. That's right, Quincy, Ohio. That's right. And this is what he said when he got these men there. He took them to this mound, and he said, "The visions of the past being opened to my understanding, the Spirit of the Almighty, I discovered that the persons whose skeleton was before us," so they dug him up. He was about 18 inches to 2 feet under the surface, so very shallow grave, so mounded up, just like it says in the Book of Mormon, the original part, and was a white Lamanite, a large, thick-set man, a man of God. His name was Zelf. So he was revealed to him that his name was Zelf. He was a warrior and a chieftain of the great prophet Onondagas, who was known from the hill Cumorah, so we know that where that is, or the Eastern Sea. So in the Book of Mormon, it talks about the Eastern Sea and the Western Sea and passages and all kinds of stuff. But here we now not only identified the hill Cumorah, but we've identified the Eastern Sea. And the only sea north of Cumorah is Lake Ontario and then Lake Erie. So that's the Eastern Sea. And he was killed by the battle of the arrow found among his ribs during this last great struggle with the Lamanites. Church History, 1948 edition. Here's the arrow. One is a drawing, and the other one through the glass reflected. Doesn't look very good. This was given to Brigham Young, and we still have it in church archives. These are the artifacts that were found in Zelf's Mound: bear teeth, axe heads, copper, all of the Jaredite or archaic period. So this dates back quite a ways, this mound. And then the next location that I talk about that's indicated in the Book of Mormon and the Book of Ether is also revealed in Doctrine and Covenants, section 116. And it's a revelation which the Lord gave, identifying the location of Adam on Diamond. And so we know where that is, near Independence, Missouri. And so now we have three locations. We have Zelf's Mound, we have Cumorah, and we have Adam on Diamond, where Adam was brought to the earth, or where the garden in Eden was located. This one is called the Hopewell Mound. We went out and visited it. It's a berm that runs around. It's about 6 feet tall, that berm. And then it has several mounds on the inside. And they have lunar alignments, so that they can tell if there's a solar eclipse coming. They know when that's going to happen. They know which constellation it's happening in. They knew the days of the week because of that, the months of the year because of that, and it fits. Now, these mounds, interestingly enough, all seem to line up with lunar, and lunar is a Hebrew thing, whereas solar is an Egyptian thing. So anytime you've seen lunar alignments in anything, that would affiliate with Hebrew or Israelite, the house of Israel. You can see where the burial pits were. You can also see where the sidewalk goes. That's where a tower would have been, and that's all they did was put a sidewalk in there to give you access. And there's several of those entrances all the way around where the towers would have been. On top of that, also, when they peeled the grass back, had a cement capping, and inside the cement capping, guess what they found? Burnt off posts that had been put in there as pickets, as described first in those first parts that we talked about in the Book of Mormon. So here's a very strong indication. There is the actual cement that they took off the top of those caps. This is what the mounds look like now. It's in Ross County, just outside Chillicothe. There is the Miami mound, the way it looks now compared to the way it looked before. Beside it is also drawings that came out of the Smithsonian now that show all of the other types of mounds and burrows, and they're done exactly in lunar alignment, and they're perfect circles. They're bigger than many of the pyramids in Egypt, much larger, bigger acreages they cover, bigger than Stonehenge, uh, and they're perfectly done. Perfect circles, like 500-foot diameter circles, 1,000-foot ones, and they're done in specific designs, sending specific messages. And we're going to talk about that when we get to the Great Octagon. Here's two more, just to show you that they're all over the place. One's in Kentucky with a flat top, which would be used for where a king might live, or where they would offer sacrifices on altars. Altars are built like that. And one in Arizona. This one here is the Grave Creek Mounds in Virginia, and St. Paul, Minnesota. There are two mounds there. And the Grave Creek stone, we have some artifacts that came out of there that are interesting, and they're ancient Hebrew. Ancient Hebrew was written 400 years, up to 400 AD. Ancient Hebrew had its own form of writing. After that, vowels were inserted. So if you had a name like Mulek, M-L-K is how it would have been spelled here, because there were no vowels in it. And you would, after that, they would have put the vowels in, and they could have been anything. It could have been Moloch, or it could have been Melech, Mulek, whatever. Anything with a vowel. Milek. And here is the drawing that came out of on that Grave Creek stone. And here we have artifacts that came out of that same area. And we have head helmets made out of copper. And we have spear points. And we have beads. And arrowheads, as well as adorning buttons, earrings, those types of things, bracelets. So they were very sophisticated in what they were doing. Here's another mound. It's located in Wisconsin, and there are actually 7 mounds in this location. This one here is in Ohio, and it looks kind of like the hill Cumorah in a lot of ways, without the trees on it now, and there weren't trees on it originally, that many anyway. Here's one in California, and this just shows you that these mounds are all over. They cover all of the land. This one we found in Chillicothe, and it was well, Columbia, Ohio. That's right. Columbus. Well, it's Columbus, Ohio. That's correct. And it says they didn't know about this one, but this guy met us in church, and he says, "I know where there's another mound now." So he took us up here, and we went there. This is what it says: the Shrum Mound, preserved as a memorial to those first Ohioans whose bones rest in this ancient tomb. So they considered it to be a tomb. Another place probably where people died because of war, or a leader, and they memorialized them like that, just as they did in Egypt. A mound could have been a pyramid. A tell could have been a tomb, which, like King Herod, was buried in a tell, and we know about that. Ladd observatories, this was destroyed, but they got a record of it. So this is just like the henge in Britain, Stonehenge, only probably bigger than Stonehenge. And it looks very similar. I thought it kind of looks like how a human cell is made up also, but that's another issue. This one here is located in Cahokia, just near St. Louis, Missouri. It's the largest pyramidal mass in America. It's larger than Giza. It sits on a bigger acreage. It has a bigger footprint than the Giza pyramid. And they reconstructed some of it here, and where they could tell that the stockades were put in to protect attack on this location. Over here on the right-hand side, we've got Rod Meldrum that we went on the tour with. And then we went up to the top of the mound and looked at it. It's fantastic, great view. And great, there's my wife going up and coming down. And there I am up here and I'm coming down. So this was a very large structure. You can see looking down towards the field out this way. And these are mounds and berms all through this area here that go along with this one. It's called Monk's Mound because the monks in the 1700s built a chapel up on the first level. And this is what it would have looked like at that time. Again, Liberty Earthworks shows you how accurate they were. 500-foot diameter, 40 acres, 27 acres. Bigger than the Giza pyramids, all of it, much bigger. These are the bones that were taken out of the Great Lakes areas where thousands upon thousands of bones were stacked up, men, women, and children in battles, obviously, because there was no formal burial, just as indicated in the Book of Mormon. This particular one is the Great Octagon in Newark, and there's a whole story that goes behind this one. Basically, what happens is the natives tell us that each one of these circles represent a part of our existence before we came here, our existence on the earth, and our life after we leave Earth, and the paths that we can take. And it should sound familiar to what's in the Bible as well as the Book of Mormon, because it is. So anytime you see a round circle like that, it can represent a number of things, but primarily a round circle will represent eternity or a galaxy, another place that we were at before we came here. And the square one represents the earth, representing the four winds, the four corners of the earth, the four quadrants. And so that'll give you a good indication. This is a more of the same. And this is the actual entrance into that area. And notice the berms are on the inside of this structure, and it runs for over 4 miles long and has a golf course on the backside of it built into the berms. These berms would have been 20, 25 feet tall in the peak of their time. And the burrows on the inside means that this was a sacred place that would have been used to defend, because you would have been attacked from the outside and would not run down the hill into the. So it wasn't defended. It was probably a sacred place. And how we kind of know this is also the traditional stories of an Ojibwe woman that grew up in Hudson Bay area and was brought down here on an excursion with her grandmother, who was a shaman for her tribe, and they would bring the young children down here when they reached the age of 18 or so, and they would tell them what this was all about and what the meanings of the circles and the octagons and the squares were, and how that applied to their life and basically their religion, their beliefs. And when Rod Meldrum was giving a presentation here, this Ojibwe woman approached him and said she needed to tell him her story, and so she did. She said, when she was brought down here by her mother, her grandmother, and was explained the purpose of life and the purpose of these sacred grounds, that that later on she went to school, graduated from school, and then one day was wondering if what her grandmother told her was true. And so she decided she would ask the great creator about that. And so she did. She asked that that would be revealed to her, that she would find out if that was true or not. And not very long after that, two young men came to her door in white shirts with tags on their shirt and gave her a copy of the Book of Mormon and asked her to read it, and if she had any questions she could get back to them, and they would answer those questions. It wasn't long after that that she sat down and read that book from cover to cover. And the next morning, before I guess she read all night. And the next morning at about 6 o'clock in the morning, she phoned the elders, these two young men, and was angry with them and wanted them to come over to her place and explain themselves. And so they did. They went over. And when they got there, she said, "Who gave you the authority to write this book?" And so they went through and explained how they got the book and all about it. And she said, after they gave the explanation, she says, "I know these people in this book. They're my people. I know who Ishmael is. I know the name of Ishmael's wife. I know the names of all the daughters of Ishmael, because that's my great grandfather in way back times." She joined the church, and I have information that she is now working in the Ogden area in Utah, in the Ogden Temple. So a great story. And to go along with that story was another one, because when I left from Cardston, Alberta to go out there to do this research, my mother was in a nursing home. And there was a young Native girl there that was helping take care of her, a nice girl. And she would ask me about some of this stuff that I was researching and was very interested in it. And she said, "Well, when you get back, tell me what you found, because I'd really like to know." And so when I got back, I was up visiting with my mother, and she came along and she says, "Oh, by the way, Terry, did you go on that trip?" I said, "Yes, I did. And I have a question from you. What tribe are you from?" I asked her. She says, "Ojibwe." I says, "Isn't that interesting?" And so I told her a story about this Ojibwe woman, and her eyes got big, and she says, "I've read some of the Book of Mormon. I too know that I am a daughter of Ishmael." I know, wow, that hits close to home. That was pretty fantastic. So that ties in pretty good with the Book of Mormon. Here we have traditional history. We have the physical evidence of an area that represents something to be holy and saint, and out of this area came some artifacts. Koshkoton, Ohio is where these artifacts came from, out of this particular mound, in fact. And on the left-hand side, we have a sarcophagus there that was dug out of these mounds. And on the right-hand side, we have the little bull with the sarcophagus, the bull being item 3 and 4. And then item 2 is a keystone. And when they dug these out, they weren't sure what they were, but they recognized that it had writing on them, and it looked to be somewhat similar to Hebrew. And so they took it to a rabbi, and they asked him if he could read that, and he said he could. And so they said, "What does it say?" He says, "Above the man's head, it says Moshe," which interpreted is Moses or Mosiah. And of course, we had King Mosiah in the Book of Mormon. And then on the outside, they asked him what that read. And he says, "Oh, that's the 10 Commandments. It's written in ancient Hebrew." So it had to be 400 AD and earlier, which means there were Hebrews on this continent 400 AD and earlier because of the writing. On the keystone, it has writing on all 3 sides. And I think I got the interpretation here. It says on the keystone, "King of the earth, the word of the Lord, the laws of Jehovah, the Holy of Holies." This would be a strong indication that we had a temple on this particular spot. This is a serpent mound. The interesting thing about a serpent is that if you remember Moses, when he was talking to the children of Israel and they were being attacked by fiery serpents and bitten, and they would die if they didn't look at the rod he was holding with the serpent on it. The serpent represents deity and always has. So whatever culture you're looking at, if you see a serpent or a dragon or a feathered dinosaur or feathered eagle. It all represents deity. And so here we have a serpent, and in the front of the serpent, out at the front there, you see his head up there, and there is an egg coming out of his mouth. And at that point, there was an altar that was up there. This was destroyed and pushed down into that creek bed, which where it lays still. But this represents deity. Anytime you see a serpent on any artifacts, that's what it represents. Now, there's two types of deity. There's good deity and there's bad deity. And in the Garden of Eden, we have bad deity tempting Adam and Eve, and we have good deity telling them not to eat of the fruit. And so you have those two serpents. So there's always a conflict with this serpent thing as to whether it's a good one or a bad one. They thought this was pagan, and that's why they destroyed it. And this is a copy from the Smithsonian showing the same thing that they'd drawn up in the 1800s with the altars. And then here's another one. In Almo 50, it says, and they also began the same year to build many cities on the north. One in a peculiar manner, which they call Lehi, Hanukkah. And we can see that we see the oil lamp, we see the square or the compass, and we see, here we go, we see the compass and we see the menorah. What's interesting is they destroyed this mound, but they didn't destroy the mound coming into it. And that particular mound, interestingly enough, those berms form a letter called She in the Hebrew language. So even though they got rid of that, they didn't get rid of the Hebrew inscription that was put beside that. So, and here is a candle menorah carved into a rock. The Twamis say that this is a symbol of their ancient ancestors carved in a cave in Michigan. More mounds, berms, squares, circles. We all get the picture of that, but they're everywhere. The Book of Mormon talks about elephants. Here is a mound that they recorded, the Smithsonian. They destroyed this mound, but they recorded it, and we have a record of it. And here's a picture of an elephant. I think that elephants were quite plentiful because right now in New York, they found 116 mastodons recently buried in New York. So far, matter of fact, when we were out there, they were digging one up in, I think it was Michigan. And then in Ohio, I think there's the number on this one, I can't remember what it was, but it seemed like it was almost 160 or something different, and 3 different types of species of elephants. And so they talk about the Book of Mormon, different types of species, and they give them different names. And so this would correlate with that also. Here's an actual skeleton that they dug up. On the right-hand side is effigy pipes. The one over on the side is a dog. If you were smoking this pipe, the tobacco would go on the top, and then you'd have to smoke it out the backside of the dog. Cool. Horses. They said there's no such thing as horses in America. They went extinct, and then they said, not true. Much of this evolution took place in North America where horses originated. Where horses originated in America. This is what scientists tell us now, but became extinct about 10,000 years ago. The horses belonged to the order odd-toed ungulates, the members of which all are shared hoofed feet and an odd number of toes on each foot, as well as mobile upper lips and a similar tooth structure. And so here we have evidence that horses originated in America. More, this is the Spruce Hill earthworks dating back into 100 BC to 400 AD, fits the time period, has the same type of structure, built up on a hill. This one here we climbed, I believe this is the one we climbed. and went up there, and very interesting. It's about 75 feet straight up. Very hard to attack. Good place. They could house probably 14 to 20,000 people on this area. And this is what it would look like in an artist's rendering. Mounds everywhere. Artifacts. These are the Michigan tablets. Over 30,000 of these tablets have been found. And they have unique writing on them. Not much is being done with them, but they do have a symbol on them up here that is written in cuneiform. And you see it up here also. And you'll see it right here and right here. So it goes along with their documents. It's called the mystic symbol. It's a native symbol. Cuneiform was written by the Sumerians. If you were going to translate this, what would you call this up here? You'd call that the sun outside of our solar system, or in our solar system, but here. And this translated means Yehoda, Jehovah. On their tools, same thing, mystic symbol. The writings, which are a form of Hebrew, Egyptian, Chinese, I would say. The all-seeing eye, a parrot up in this area, indicating that the climate of the area was different at the time. Axe head, smelting. They found over 300 smelting structures for making iron and copper tools and war tools. A copper nail for ship or crucifix or whatever in northern Wisconsin. These are the copper mines. These copper mines are the largest copper mines in the world. And most of the copper can be traced. So if it came out of this area, we would be able to identify it. So in 1997, when they opened up a tomb in Egypt, it had copper and silver that was molded together. So they took that to a laboratory in England and asked them if they could identify where this came from in the world. And they said, yeah, piece of cake, Michigan. That's the only place that it's natural like that. And so we know that the Egyptians were connected to America also, which also gives us another connection to the old country way back. Tablets, clay tablets, copper tablets, all written in unique languages. And in Michigan, by the way, there's 500 million pounds of copper that went missing between 2000 BC and I guess it would be 580, somewhere in there. These are more artifacts, well tooled, well polished, very good. So interesting things I found. A dinosaur head. How would they know what a dinosaur looked like unless it was roaming around? The oil lamps, same as they make in Egypt. And here is a dog head that would have existed during that period of time that they didn't think was around, but obviously it was. This is a pipe, again, an effigy pipe. And it has the snake wrapped around it representing deity. So this they would have used in ceremonial pipes. We call it a peace pipe today, but they may have had different uses for it because when they met with each other, they would smoke this as a covenant between each other not to do or to do certain things. And we call that an oath or a covenant. This is my favorite pipe, which is the skeleton pipe. And I thought, boy, in the Book of Mormon, that represents the Gadian robbers. If you don't do what you agree to do, we're going to shun you, we're going to put you down, we're going to haul you down, and if you don't do what complies to, you're a dead man.
The spider.
It's a spider skeleton pipe, yeah. These are the beads. Over 48,000 pearls in one mound, 100,000 pearl in the 1880s were found, sewn together, intricate, very, very nicely done. This shows their artistic work, that they were very sophisticated. Some of their war tools and their pipes. The interesting thing about these mica ones is they're polished so high they used them as mirrors, and they used them for reflecting mirrors also. I think I have that, maybe not. Anyway, there's the Birdman and one of his plates. Another plate with writings on it, so they're everywhere. It talks about how they threw their arrows or lance, and this is how they used to do it. It's called an atla. Atella. Can't even say it. Can't remember how to pronounce that. Atlatl. That's it. Atlatl. Yeah. These are swords they found. The one pointing on one side is from Israel, and the other one's from North Dakota. They're the exact same construction. How would they have done that? Be mathematically impossible. And again, same type of things, breastplates. Here you'd put a breastplate on here, and you'd put the rope in there, tie a knot around the end, put it in front. Here's the helmets with the what do you call those things? Where you hook the rope onto it, tie it to the thing, then tie it around your ears and around your chest, and you've got a protection. Talking about how did they get there? Well, we now know the ocean currents comply with what is stated in the Book of Mormon. They could have easily come on the currents and be carried. Both the Mulekites, the Jaredites, and the Lehites. Helaman, behold, 100th part of proceedings of this people, yea, the account of the Lamanites and the Nephites and their shipping and their building of ships. So they only told you 100th part of what they were doing, but they were building ships and they were shipping stuff. I wonder what they were shipping, because it showed up in Egypt. I think they were shipping a lot of copper, a lot of wood, a lot of that stuff. In fact, if you look in when King Solomon built his temple, he said they went away for 3 years, and the songs of Solomon that have been discovered now talk about him going to Peru. Peru is a Chinese name, by the way. It's not Spanish, and it's not Algonquin. It's not Mayan. It's Chinese, just like Chile is Chinese. So these countries were named that way. Yucatan is another good one. That's the actual name that they gave to that land. And so you can see here the ancient drawings in Egypt show the same types of ships being built that were built in this area. Down at Porus Point, down at the Gulf of Mexico, they found these drawings with these writings on it, which are Hebrew, with the menorah on it and the 2 snakes that we were talking about. Kind of cool. When in 2011, I believe it was, the Ojibwe Algonquin nations had a conference, and it was the archaeologists, both native and regular archaeologists had a conference, and they were telling how they thought that the native Indians came from Asia, migrated through the Great Bering Strait down through to Alaska and down the BC coast, and then across and over to the eastern part of America. And when they asked Red Sky, that's his native name, who is an archaeologist, what he thought of that, he says, well, I have some artifacts here that prove you different, and our history proves different. And this is what he pulled out, was this drawing that they have on some birch bark that is stored now, both parts, because one part was missing, but they found both parts now. And it describes how they came in, the St. Lawrence Sea River, the French River, they call it, the Micmac Island, the Sault Ste. Marie, went down to Lake Superior, the Whitefish Point, all the way down, describes all their civilizations, how they came in, and they came in from the east on the waters. And this is what they found in southern, in the University of Toronto. This is where this came from. It shows they came in on 4 turtle boats. And we know that Mulek came by boat, and so did the Jaredites, and they came in the north. And Lehi came in the south. So there's a good chance that these people are descendants of the Mulekites, the Nephites, and the Jaredites. And this shows what they teach in their schools. The voice of the Ojibwe show how they came in down the St. Lawrence Seaway, the places they went to, and how they settled the land. Canada, interesting. That's Algonquin, by the way. And just for your understanding, the land of Cana, or Canaan, and Canada, translated is Wei Ji Jing, which almost sounds Chinese. Interesting. So you can see the intermittent. And now the land south was called Lehi, and the land north was called Mulek, which was after the son of Zedekiah, who was the king at that time, back in the time when the destruction of Jerusalem took place in 740 BC. For the Lord did bring Mulek into the land north and Lehi into the land south. So we know how the Ojibwe tell us they came in. Now, where did Lehi came in? He had to come in. And there was no contact between them for 400 years before they hooked up in a place called Zarahemla. This is the map that the archaeologists give us. This is not church, but we've added the names of locations on there that we know of. So archaeologists tell us that 600 BC in Sugar Creek, Florida, a group of Hebrews landed there. This is Archaeology 101 from archaeologists in that area. And then they moved up into the Tennessee, West Virginia area about 100 BC, and 300 BC up into the Illinois area. And then they talk about them having wars, and this is what it says. Hopewell timeline, which is, Hopewell is named after where they found artifacts on that guy's farm named Hopewell. But they don't know who a native American culture that once flourished in Ohio, Kentucky, Indiana, West Virginia, constructed geometric and animal-shaped earthworks, and often rivaled Stonehenge in their astronomical accuracy. A few are still extant from as early as 600 BC that stretched over miles and rose to heights of 15 feet or more, were either gouged out or plowed under in the 19th century or paved over for development in the 20th century. The Hopewell culture and its earthwork buildings were all but over. What caused this is unknown, and it ended in 400 AD up in the New York area, which is Cumorah. Fits perfect timeline, and if you're a member of the church, you would say, I'll take it. By the Gentiles are telling us this. Latitude of Jerusalem, 31.7 degrees. Latitude of Sugar Creek, 37.1 degrees. Another coincidence, right? Buffalo talks about in the Book of Mormon that there were migrating beasts, and Alma and the Ether talks about migrating beasts seeking their food. How many types of migrating beasts are there in Central and South America? The answer is 0. There's only one major group of migrating beasts that go from north to south, and that is the bison or the buffalo. And this is the area that they take in, the exact same thing that we're talking about here. So that blue part, very few range in this area. They all range up through Western Canada and Midwest, South, and Southwest United States. The beasts. Tornadoes. Talks about tornadoes in the Book of Mormon. Well, Tornado Alley is right in that same region. How many tornadoes are there in Central and South America? basically none, very few, but we got them like crazy. Pinnacle Mountain in Connecticut. In the stones, carved the name in Hebrew, Abraham, Isaac, Adam, and Moses. Strong connections again to this land. Here's the language of the Michigan tablets, the Mid and South American Native Indian written language, the Kinderhook plates that were found, the Egyptian writings that have been found, the Semitic old writings, the Bablos writings, the Crete and Cyprus writings. You can see they're the same people. They have the same symbols, changed a little as time goes on, just like our writing does. Now we can't even write. Algonquin, Micmac, Indian, Book of Prayer. Same, this is Michigan tablets, this is Nephite tablets, writings that we have. Book, after thousands of years, all were destroyed except the Lamanites, and they, the principal ancestors of the American Indians. John Eliot, 12 years of his life to complete the first Bible ever printed in America, written in the native language Algonquin. If you translated it and read it, if you're a Hebrew, over 6,000 of the words are Hebrew in the language. Here's some examples. Pale means to pray. Ale means God. Ah, connection. The ah for nouns is characteristic of many native words. So if you can pronounce these words, you're better than I am. Book of Mormon, ah, everywhere. Old Testament, ah, everywhere. You see this. So the language is totally connected to these people. The Algonquin tribes are connected. Crossing the narrow neck of land, a half day's journey east to the West Sea. We know where the East Sea is, so the West Sea had to be in a narrow neck of land to win across that. It says the same type of thing about a day's journey and for the Lamanites to go across that. And here we have Michigan, Lake Erie. We have the great black swamp that's no longer there. It's still swampy, but not like it was. But it would have made the passage even narrower. And here we have the narrow passage up here by the Great Lakes, which would be Niagara Falls area. And then down here between Detroit and Lake Huron, we have another passage. And it could go across here also. It really doesn't matter that much. The fact is, this would have been a much bigger area 2,000 years ago, but the landscape's still recognizable. And then again, we go back to the mounds, how far they're spread across. What do we know? We know where Sugar Creek is. We know where Lehigh could have landed. According to archaeologists, 600 BC, they would have went up the Mississippi River. We got Adam-on-Diam in there. We got Zarahemla, where Nauvoo is located. We got Zelf's Mound. We have the West Sea. We have the East Sea. We have Cumorah. We have the Pass. We have a temple here that was found in that area that resembles the Temple of Solomon. Primary building material during that period of time was wood. So we wouldn't find a lot of stuff because they would have been built mostly out of wood. And the wood they used, it says in the Book of Mormon, they burned it. Well, they wouldn't be burning rocks, and the rock stuff would be left. And we do have evidence of rock roads and that type of thing. Interesting enough, if they built this would not be considered a Nephite structure because Nephite didn't terrace their structures. They had mounds. The Hebrews didn't terrace their structures. They had temples built like this. Does that temple look like an Aztec or a Mayan temple? Not at all. Here is the one that we showed, the Egyptian temple that they found in 1934. Similar dimensions to the Temple of Solomon with all of the right things in place, indicating that it was a place of worship. This is what Edward Phillips said. I was standing by the temple talking to Brother Woodruff as he pointed out the spot to me on the opposite side of the river. So he was in Nauvoo, about a half a mile above Montrose, which is just across the Mississippi River. And he said there would be a temple, a city and a temple built there, and the place would be called Zarahemla. So good indication by revelation that he was told something we don't know. Here is the altar. This on the right is Adred in the desert, Hebrew altar. And here is a Hopewell altar. You see, they're very similar. They're made out of stone that wasn't hewn by an axe or cut in any way. Had to be natural stone. They also had ramps that ran up to them. And this is verifying in Exodus exactly that. And this is what they would look like, all ramps. If you look at the Cardston Temple, it's built like the one in the right upper hand corner. DNA haplo-X has now been reported in contemporary members of several specific unrelated language families which are distributed throughout the geographic region of the Canadian subarctic Great Lakes region. All the other ones are A, B, C, and D, which come out of Asia, but here in that same area, haplo-X. So they went looking to see if they could find haplo-X anywhere else. Guess where they found it? Israel. Haplo-X. A little bit in Finland, a little bit in Italy, but major in haplo-X. The Ashkenazi Jews have that marking. It's thought to be the most common speaker of the Algonquin Indians, haplo-X. 20% at that time when this was done in 2003. Now it's gone as high as 40 to 60% haplo-X. They are Hebrew descendants, a remnant of those people. Book of Mormon talks about they were living the law of Moses. And so in order to do that, they would have to have, Leviticus tells what they'd have to have. For a peace offering, they'd have to have ox, sheep, goats, unleavened cakes. Meal offering, they'd have to have barley and wheat and ears of corn, also called bread cakes up there. Sin offering, a bull, a goat, a lamb, a dove, and so on. Well, they said that there weren't any of those things here at the time the Book of Mormon was written, and that's not possible. The question is, if it was in South America or Central America, those animals didn't exist there. But did they exist in North America? They didn't think so until now, which they found them all. So we know that they've got all that stuff. So they could have lived the law of Moses, only not in Central America, but this is what Dr. Hugh Nibley said. He said, what most impressed me last summer on my first and only expedition to Central America was the complete lack of information about anything. A closer approximation to the Book of Mormon picture of Nephite culture is seen in the earth and palisade structures of the Hopewell and Adena culture areas than in the latter stately piles of stone in Mesoamerica. So Nibley thought this was a better picture. Now, who am I? I can trace my ancestry right back to this guy up in the top. His name was Powhatan, Chief Powhatan. He'd be my 11th generation grandfather. That makes me a descendant, a remnant of that same people, the Algonquins. When they did the baptisms for all of the presidents of the United States, Lorenzo Snow, and we looked up the information, we found out he not only baptized the presidents of the United States, except for Buchanan and Van Buren, who were never done, but he did the baptisms also for the native Indians. And we find Powhatan, my grandfather, right here. He was the father of Pocahontas, just as for information. And last but not least, we believe in signs of the time. In 2017, we had an eclipse. And according to the Book of Revelations, the Book of Revelation, chapter 12, it tells us that there's going to be a darkening of the sun, an eclipse, and there will be 7 years of tribulation, 2017. It's coming back in 2024. What does it cross? It crosses Jackson County, Missouri, Independence, Missouri, Adam-on-Diamond, Kirkland, Ohio, where the temple was first done, and recently we just introduced what I would consider to be opening of the seventh seal. Very amazing signs and symbols. That concludes my presentation on the Book of Mormon and the lands of the Book of Mormon, except for one thing. This is what Joseph Smith said. If you believe anybody, you'll have to believe this. He says, we arrived this morning on the banks of the Mississippi River. We left the eastern part of the state of Ohio, wandering over the plains of the Nephites, recounting occasionally the history of the Book of Mormon, roving over the mounds of that once beloved people of the Lord, picking up their bones and skulls as proof of its divine authenticity. There he is, telling you where the Book of Mormon was, telling you where he went. All the way over from the East Sea, all the way to Zelf's Mound and to Nauvoo. That's got to be powerful. Thank you very much.